carbon impact or alternative compliance fees. I would also move, I think I can do this, with the amendment that is also on our agenda, or excuse me, on board docs, that also provides that no assessment of a carbon impact or alternative compliance payment shall be imposed unless previously authorized by a majority of the legal voters of the city voting at an annual or special meeting waived for the purpose. That's the motion. Let me backtrack in terms of how we got here. This council.
I'll second that.
Thank you.
Thank you. Yep. Seconded by Councilor Hanson. Go ahead. Continue, Councilor Mason.
Thank you. How we got here, this council back in May of 2019 passed a resolution that required BED to come back with policy recommendations regarding decarbonization and electrification requirements for new buildings. It also required consideration of a ban on buildings connected to fossil fuel infrastructure. That process sat with BED and took some time. There were proposals that came forward to the council in early 2020. BED did hold a public meeting in July of 2020, and most of the attendees at that meeting supported a ban on fossil fuel connections for new buildings. BED then came forward with a more formal proposal that included a carbon fee if the building was connected to fossil fuel infrastructure. It also proposed evaluating policies that would support moving toward net zero in existing buildings. But the proposal at that time was to move forward first with new buildings and then deal with existings. BED was also then and remains committed to incentives in order to get electrification and energy efficiency started. That policy was then sent to the city attorney's office with instructions to come up with the right language and sent to ordinance, which again, this is typically would go to TUC or a different committee, but it was sent to ordinance to review the language. At our first hearing of the ordinance committee in November, the city attorney came and I think raised a little bit of a red flag that based on their review, the city did not have enabling language from the state in order to assess a carbon fee and potentially questionable authority to regulate thermal energy solutions. This was a bit of a surprise to the committee and I think the BED. So they were tasked, BED and the city attorney's office were then tasked very quickly to go back and come up with potential language to provide us with a path forward. At our ordinance committee hearing on the 3rd of December, what was reported back was an earlier version of this, that we would be pursuing a dual track. One would be to pursue a charter change that would enable the assessment of a carbon fee. And the second piece, which with a relatively quick turnaround, is BED is now tasked with moving forward with building code ordinance changes applicable to new buildings, requiring them to have a primary system that's non-fossil fuel based. So that's where we left on the 3rd. The ordinance committee then unanimous, or it was actually Councilor Hanson and I, without necessarily taking a view as to the language out of fear that we would miss town meeting day, voted to send it back to the full council for its consideration. The city attorney was still in the process of conducting its review. That was, the benefit between last week and now this week. They've completed their review, and this language does meet with the city attorney's acceptance. The new piece that was tacked on the amendment, the council, and I'll let Councilor Hanson speak to this, was a bit in response. There was a story on CAX that came out that, in my view, misreported that this language potentially was requiring every existing home to convert to force conversion to a non-fossil fuel based system. That was not the intent. This was just enabling legislation. But based in part on that concern and the feeling that we would have to have more process before that step were to be taken, that's what the extra amendment was intended to encapsulate. So with that, I know the mayor is on, who has been intimately involved in this process, and I believe Darren Springer is also on if there are specific questions. Thank you, President Tracy.
Okay, excellent. All right. I'll go to Mayor Weinberger now before we get into councilor debate. Go ahead, Mayor.
Thank you, President Tracy. Thank you, Councilor Mason, for introducing this. I want to thank Councilor Hanson for the close collaboration throughout this process to, I hope hope get to a moment of consensus tonight and being able to move forward. Certainly, I believe that this charter change is a critical one for us meeting the goals that we laid out in the Net Zero Energy City plan. That plan made very clear that if we are going to achieve the very ambitious, we think it's as ambitious as any goal in the city, in the country for a municipality of becoming a net zero energy city by 2030, the area where we needed to make the biggest change was in our buildings. And we are already making considerable strides towards that goal in the early years of that roadmap. It is very clear that the green stimulus incentives that were offered this year by BED have started to change the trajectory of our buildings and move more and more of our building thermal systems towards electric, cold climate heat pumps and other electric technologies. However, we have a very long way to go. Well more than 90% of our buildings today are dependent on fossil fuels for their heating. And we need additional tools, we need additional authorities, we need to work more with the people of Burlington if we are going to achieve what we have set out to, and more importantly, if we're going to do our share to change the trajectory that this plan is on, to take strong measures to address the climate crisis and forge a different future for ourselves and our children and the generations to come. This is the kind of strong action that has been lacking from other levels of government for decades. I'm hopeful and proud to be with you here tonight on the cusp of going to the people of Burlington and seeing if they want to partner with us and really ensure that we continue Burlington's remarkable multi-decade trajectory of climate leadership. I think this is the third great chapter of climate leadership that the city has undergone. The first one was back in the 80s when we led the way on initial steps with weatherization. The next chapter really has been the last 10 years when we've gone from, or 15 years now, we went from in 2004 having only 25% of our electricity generated by renewables to 100% by 2014, and we've sustained that now for more than 5 years. This is the hardest chapter, this is the hardest frontier, but it's one that we can have that same sort of material progress and success on if we put our backs into it and if we're willing to be active as a local government and work with the people of Burlington to decarbonize our buildings. This charter change will be a big step in that direction, and if the council does choose to put it on the ballot, I certainly will be making it clear every step of the way until March that I fully support this and think it's an important step for us to take. Thanks, President Tracy.
Thank you, Mayor. I'll go to Councilor Hanson to be followed by Councilor Pine.
Great. Yeah. Thanks, Councilor Mason and Mayor, for getting into some of the details around the policy. I just wanted to start with really a reminder of why we're talking about this and why we're looking at this policy. As we work our way towards the end of this pandemic and move towards vaccination, we are still going to remain squarely in the middle of a much larger and much more deadly and permanent crisis that threatens really everything that we know and love, the climate crisis. And I want to address the cost of doing nothing or inaction in the face of this. In the US alone, extreme weather events are costing hundreds of billions of dollars per year. And that's just a number, that's just the cost. But those impacts go way beyond economic, and that number continues to rise as well. To bring it kind of down to the individual level and make that number seem a little less abstract, there's a 2016 report, really recommend it, by Demos and Next Gen Climate, that says that on the path we're on, someone my age earning a median income will lose $100,000 in lifetime income and $142,000 in wealth due to the impact of the climate crisis. someone born in 2015 with median earnings will lose $357,000 in lifetime income and $581,000 in wealth. That's just one person, one median income person. And that was in 2016. It's actually pretty likely that those numbers have gotten worse due to the lack of policy action to drive us forward and the rollbacks that we've seen from the Trump administration. So the economics of not acting are horrible, but this is really much deeper than economics. And this really gets to the concerns about survival itself and our ability to access clean drinking water, to have stable food, to have housing that isn't destroyed by clean weather events. This is something that's going to force mass migration, creating war and conflict around the world. So a lot of this is already happening in a lot of parts of the community. I think it's easy to forget in Vermont because it's been a little while since we've had a major, devastating, extreme weather event here since Hurricane Irene. So, this is already killing or displacing tens of millions of people a year, and that's only going up, and it's disproportionately impacting poor folks and people of marginalized identities. So I just want to really hammer home, I think this gets forgotten, that inaction is not an option. We have to act, and every community has to act. No one's going to come into Burlington and just wave a magic wand. The state and the federal government, they're not going to wave a magic wand and suddenly all of our buildings are not using fossil fuels. So we really have to take ownership and make sure this gets done, and we can't just rely on the market to solve it. We have to use policy. And that's why a little over a year ago, we passed 2 climate resolutions on the same day. And I really hope they take both of those resolutions seriously and that they're not just words on a paper. One of them is that we committed to getting off of fossil fuels by 2030. The other one was that we're committed to a just transition, and one that prioritizes those who are most vulnerable to the climate crisis and who have the least ability to adapt. So any policy coming out of this authority, if we do get this authority and this charter change, really has to focus on getting those with the most resources to step up to the plate, and any upfront costs that there are should be shouldered by folks who have resources, so that those who are struggling can not only avoid any burdens with this, but really get the benefits of this transition and enjoy the enormous benefits of getting off of the fossil fuel economy. So this really needs to be about delivering for working people, not punishing working people. And I think the good thing about this amendment as well is that you don't have to sort of just take my word or our word for that, because any policy that would come out of this that would have to do with taxation or a carbon pricing scheme would go back to the voters, and what couldn't happen without the voters. And so I think that's critical. So I just want to close and say, I'm really excited tonight. I'm really proud of what we're doing as a council. I think we're taking major action on some of the issues that are most important to our community, which is housing, racial justice, and public safety, and now on the climate crisis. So I sincerely thank everyone who's working on this, everyone who's supporting this, and really just putting, the need for progress over, skepticism and over fear, and really just putting love first and working for a better community and world. So thank you.
Councilor Hanson, Councilor Shannon. Oh, sorry. I'm sorry. Councilor Pine, then Councilor Shannon. Go ahead, Councilor Pine. You're on mute.
Sorry about that. So the issue of, I think where we bring together climate justice, environmental justice, social justice, racial justice is right here in front of us tonight. And as a community, we've already long ago democratized our electrical delivery system through the public ownership of Burlington Electric. But I want us to just commit ourselves to the notion of energy justice specifically as a way to weave together environmental justice and climate change and climate emergency, climate crisis activism, and that we have an opportunity to transition away from fossil fuels to renewable energy in a way that doesn't leave people behind, that advances the idea of energy democracy, so that low income households and those without access to capital, without access to ownership, are able to enjoy the benefits and aren't just left holding on to essentially what are stranded assets that in many cases, if we don't get intentional about extending the benefits of renewable energy and energy efficiency to all segments of the community, those with the least will end up actually shouldering the burden. And so I want us to expand our notion of the just transition to include, green collar jobs and to include reducing the harmful impacts on those who are at the front line of either delivering the energy or whose community is being burdened by the location of energy generating systems, to the notion that we have to, as a city, really specifically focus on providing access to the benefits that come with the clean energy economy. But we have to be very, very focused on extending those benefits to those who are so often left behind, because otherwise we will end up with, again, the haves and the have-nots around this pursuit of what is ultimately the most important challenge, one of the most important challenges we face, but we can do it in a way that advances our justice goals as well as our climate goals. And I think Burlington could do that, and hopefully we'll all join together and make that happen. Thank you.
Now, Councilor Shannon. What about that, Councilor Pine?
Thank you, President Tracy. I am going to be supporting this today, and I want to say that I'm surprised I'm supporting this, given where we came from, and a lot of public concern about this. And I want to be clear on how that has been addressed. There were media reports about, taxing existing systems, and many people in the community were quite panicked about that. And I really felt like the original proposal was kind of writing a blank check to the city council and saying, trust us on this. And I think that the public felt the same way and was not comfortable with that. And I appreciate the work of particularly Councilor Carpenter and the mayor trying to find a solution which I think really accomplishes both goals of not writing the blank check, but getting the legislative authority. And I did not initially appreciate, when I first looked at this, I thought, well, why are we asking people to vote on this now? And then we're just going to ask them for another vote later. Like, why don't we just do this once? But because we will get, through this charge change, we will get the authority to go to the voters with this. We won't have to go through the process of getting the legislature to approve it. We can go through a much shorter process and more reliable process that gets the public input that we need. And it also creates a process whereby people are put on notice when they're making a decision about buying a boiler. They will know that, we're going to be looking down the pike at what is the technology coming down the pike and what are incentivizing upgrading the equipment, not just going for that cheapest, least efficient model. And I think that is important for transition as we transition to better and more efficient home heating appliances. So I do support this with the knowledge that the voters are going to get another crack at whatever the proposal is for incentivizing making a better environmental choice. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilor Shannon. Are there others wishing to speak? Councilor Mason to be followed by Councilor Jang.
I have, and it has been brought to my attention, the version did not include the city attorney's language, so I have minor amendment, but if you want to go to Councilor Jang first and then come back at the end of comments, I'll make my motion.
Okay, so Councilor Mason, you had already amended once, so we're on the amendment now, right?
Well, the Hanson amendment was included as part of my initial motion.
Okay, thank you for clarifying. Okay, I'll come back to you in a second. Go ahead, Councilor Jing.
Thank you, President Tracy. And I think it is important that, we have to be bold when it comes to climate change. And I think the city has been doing so many great things, so many great work, right? It's not only about thermal energy, it's also about the transportation piece, right? Intensives about people to switch from, fossil fuel cars to electric cars, bike lanes, all of those are efforts. And to me, Burlington is doing well compared to so many other municipalities. And like Councilor Hanson talked about, this is climate change. This is not only affecting people of Burlington or our state. It is planet-wide. It is, the whole entire world. We only can do what we can. And also what we're doing, when is the right time to do it? We all know that what we experience as a community, as a world with COVID-19, we're not even done with that. And people do not need any other type of unclarity. And to me, this is not the right time to bring this proposal around. The right time could be maybe next year when things settle and people know where they're going, know who they are, know what they have lost, what they have gained, in order for us to make the right step. The timing, to me, is not right at all. That's one. Two, we should not also over-regulate. We can regulate what we can. Our own buildings, as a city, those buildings we can regulate whatever we want. New buildings, we can ask for regulations. But for existing buildings and everything people are going through, this is not the right thing to do. What the news reported is completely right. It is right. It's not now, but you asking people to give you the power to regulate how they choose and what source of energy they would like to have. What the news report is completely right. Now, maybe it won't go through on March 2nd, but the people are giving you the power to do it. I completely agree with all of you, but now is not the time. To me, let's table this maybe until next year to do it. Or at least let's focus solemnly on new buildings. Existing buildings, let's not even have the conversation. It's not the right time. So for that, I gave my promises to so many people, my constituents. They confused, and we should not add any other burden to them right now. We should wait. I would not be voting on this to put it on the ballot. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Councilor Chang. Councilor Carpenter.
Thanks, and I really do appreciate that, and I happen to have many of the same constituents that Councilor Jang has, and I certainly recognize their fears and concerns, and I think misunderstandings. And I think it's really important to understand that this is a progression. Nothing will change until it comes back to us, the city councilor, to approve the ordinance and approve any proposals to put on the ballot to increase taxes. We have nothing in the near future that's going to change that. We'll have to make ourselves responsive to whatever proposals come to us and protect the citizens. And then the citizens have the right to protect themselves by voting it down. So I think this is perfectly fine and perfectly supports where we need to be in the progression of stuff, starting next year with new buildings. If the Burlington Electric Department comes to us in 2 or 3 years with more proposals, we'll talk about them and we'll consider them. Nothing is going to change in the next 24 to many years, months. This just gives us the authority to pick away at it over the next decade and start with where the low-hanging fruit are and move on. And it allows the citizens to make their own decision around anything that affects them economically.
Councilor Carpenter, Councilor Pine.
If I could just ask, Mr. President, for clarification, probably from Councilor Hanson or maybe perhaps from someone at BED if they're available. Do we need this charter language in order to institute any policies like benchmarking, which is a practice in other cities to really drive much higher performance in both commercial and residential properties? Do you know if we need this language specifically for that type of policy?
Councilor Hanson.
If Darren Springer's on, he can clarify, but I don't believe that. No, I think we can do that. I think we can do that, and we should do that. And I think we're going to be getting perhaps a presentation soon for the council on that from folks in the green building field. So I don't think this is necessary for that.
Okay, thank you. Second thing I just want to mention is I watched some of the coverage and it was actually full of inaccuracies and misinformation, and absolutely it was appalling at what the media chose to do with this story. I think it was because they knew it would generate a lot of interest, but it was just completely factually wrong. I spent 5 years in this field. We have one of the most progressive, forward-thinking, sophisticated organizations in the world, based now in Winooski, but they were based in Burlington for 32 years, BEIC, and they will make it very clear, this is a money saver, job creator, planet saver. This is not a negative thing for us to run away from. This is something for us to embrace. And it's our job as elected leaders to educate people, to educate folks, to make it clear what the benefits are. Please don't run away from this. This is something we should all be embracing. Education is the key here. We've got to get people off the notion that reducing energy consumption is somehow going to hurt them. We're going to do this in a way, it's going to be a just transition, it's going to create jobs, and it's going to save our planet. It's really the only way forward.
Thank you, Councilor Pine. I don't have anyone in the queue. So Councilor Mason, would you like to introduce
Yes, thank you, President Tracy. I know either Lori or the city attorney could pull up on a screen share. The amendments that were recommended by the city attorney's office that did not make their way onto board docs include, here we go.
Is there any way we can make that a little larger?
If you drag it, you can do that. So the amendment I am making is on line 28 on the screen share, removing the words "and levying," and then changing the word "fees" in line 28 to "payments." That is the only amendment.
Okay. Are folks clear on what they are voting on? I'm sorry, I can't see.
It is a little bit of a challenge to see the strikeout in line 28, but the word "after compliance," the word "fees" has been stricken and replaced by the word "payments."
Could you make it larger?
Yeah, is there any way to make it text larger?
More?
It's also on the bottom right. There's a little cursor that you can drag.
I know, I can't find it.
You're right there.
Right there. Oh, right there. Jeez, thank you.
Yes.
There.
Yeah, how's that?
All right, perfect. Thank you for that. Now is everyone able to see what Councilor Mason is speaking to here?
Could you just say it again?
I can't see line numbers on this, but it's striking the words "and levying" on the second sentence or line after 67. There we go, on line 28, and then striking the word "fees" and replacing it with the word "payments."
Okay, so.
And ask for a second.
Yep, exactly. If we could go out of screen share mode just so I can see folks again, please. Okay, is there a seconded by Councilor Hightower? Councilor Mason, did you need the floor back?
No, thank you.
Okay, any discussion on this amendment? Councilor Hanson.
Yeah, I guess I'm curious what what does this do? Does this do anything, or it's just a technical change? This
Sorry,
amendment.
forgive me, I should have, if I may, President Tracy. The stated explanation was, assessing and levying were synonyms. We don't need both. And assessing is a term used in the charter. And the second change was based on the explanation that it wasn't a fee in the sense of a municipal fee, which refers to payment for a municipal service. And the use of the term alternative compliance payment appears to be common in the energy field and therefore more appropriate. That was the stated explanation.
Okay, Councilor Hanson.
Great, and I think that's helpful. And I'm wondering too if the city attorney could just clarify. I've been asking this question too. I think this maybe solves the issue, but fees that are just, to cover the cost of a program, of a regulation program that we use very commonly for any new regulatory program in the city, that is not something that would, the way that it's written, that's not something that would have to go on the ballot. Is that right? Or is that still a concern?
That, President Tracy, may I respond? That would not have to go on the ballot. Any fee associated with regulating thermal energy systems that wasn't related to assessing carbon impact or alternative compliance payments would not have to go on the ballot.
Okay, great. And yeah, just to be clear for the public, those fees are strictly limited to just cover the cost of administering the oversight for the city. So it's a totally different thing. So I'm glad that we kind of cleared that up as well. And so, yeah, it sounds good. I'll support this.
Any further discussion? Okay, hearing none, we'll go to Councilor Jang. You're on mute, Councilor Jang.
I have further amendments after this.
Oh, okay. Do you have any comments on this amendment? Okay. All right. So we'll go to a vote on this amendment. All those in favor of this amendment, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Hearing none, that amendment passes unanimously. We are back to the original motion as amended. Is there further discussion?
Yes.
Councilor Jang, go ahead.
Yeah, I would like to make an amendment, and I believe sending it all of you, including Lori, as well as City Attorney Eileen. Just now, sorry about that. And my amendment is specific to striking the language. Okay. Yeah, it is to delete line numbers 25 to 27 and replace it with the following: to regulate thermal energy systems in new residential and commercial buildings approved by the City of Wellington Development Review Boards starting in 2021. That is my amendment when we strike the language, the lines 25 to 27.
Okay, is everybody clear on Councilor Jang's amendment? Okay, is there a second? There's a second. Okay. The amendment fails for lack of a second. We are still.
I need to put it on the record. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilor Jang. Are there further comments on the resolution as amended? Okay, hearing none, we will go to a vote. Will the city clerk please call the roll?
Councilor Carpenter?
Aye.
Councilor Jang?
No.
Councilor Freeman?
Yes.
Councilor Hanson?
Yes.
Councilor Hightower?
Yes.
Councilor Mason?
Yes.
Councilor Paul?
Yes.
Councilor Paulino?
No.
I'm sorry?
No.
Thank you. Counselor Pine,
Yes.
Counselor Shannon,